Revisions to the Teaching and Learning Framework, Early Childhood Education. While the TLF ECE rubric remains largely the same, there have been some minor changes to the structure and the language of the rubric with an aim of providing more consistency and clarity. The revisions to TLF ECE continue to emphasize developmentally appropriate practice as defined by the National Association for the Education of Young Children, as well as leading researchers in the field. The TLF ECE both honors the specialized work of ECE teachers and promotes strong foundations for students. ECE teachers are still being evaluated on the same 9 teach standards. Slight revisions have been made to the names of Teach 3, Teach 4, and Teach 6 to better reflect what is being measured in each standard. Each teach standard is divided into rows, each measuring one element of practice. This element is scaled from highly effective to ineffective. Recall the descriptors at each level of effectiveness, indicators. In order to provide a more consistent definition of what highly effective practice looks like, Level 4 is now structured in the same way as the other levels. In the previous version of the rubric, a teacher needed to demonstrate nearly all of the evidence listed under Level 3, plus some Level 4 evidence, in order to earn an overall score of Level 4 for a particular teach standard. Now, Level 4 descriptors are comprehensive. We use the same guidance that is used for the other 3 levels. The following best describes. This means that, as with the other levels, the Level 4 indicators must best describe your practice in order for you to receive a highly effective score for a given teach standard. This change ensures a common definition for highly effective practice district-wide. As you can see in Teach 8, rows 4 and 9, sometimes the Level 3 and 4 indicators are the same. In such instances, the remainder of the rows should include evidence of highly effective practice for a teacher to earn a Level 4 for the teach standard. In addition to the general notes below the rubric, there are also notes for specific rows. An asterisk included within the body of the rubric denotes a note that applies to the specific row. More general notes continue to appear as a numbered list at the bottom of each teach standard. Some notes also include guidance for Montessori and Tools of the Mind classroom. Reviewing these notes will be helpful to better understand how you will be evaluated on each standard. Examples from most rows, which are listed under the effective level, continue to be included. Like the notes, the examples are another convention that can provide important guidance for best practices. In the revised TLF ECE, you will also notice some changes to the language of the indicators for several of the teach standards. These changes were made to provide more clarity to teachers and observers. We will now go through each teach standard to highlight these changes. As you know, in early childhood classrooms, learning experiences can take place in a variety of contexts, which can generally be defined as lessons with distinct objectives, group meetings, and play in centers. Because the goals and expectations for each type of learning experience are different, multiple standards provide the expectations for each setting. As with the previous ECE rubric, Teach 1 continues to include a separate rubric for each context. We will look at the changes to each Teach 1 rubric one at a time. The Teach 1 rubric used during whole group or small group lessons with distinct objectives has been streamlined into 3 rows. Ensuring that your lesson organization moves students toward mastery is essential to leading objective-driven lessons. To emphasize its importance, this practice has been moved to the top row. The second row measures how well the objective communicates what students will know and be able to do. The expectations for objectives have been simplified, focusing now on whether the objective is clear to students,
and whether it conveys what students are learning and what they will be able to do as a result of the lesson. As in past years, observers will use a variety of strategies to determine whether your students understand the objectives, which may include circulating and talking with students.
The third row of Teach 1, about students demonstrating the importance of the objectives through their attention or excitement, has not changed. Let's look at the Teach 1 rubric for group meetings. All of the practices measured in the previous rubric are still represented in the 5 rows of the current rubric. The content for the Teach 1 Centers rubric has also remained consistent with the previous version.
The revised rubric for Teach 2 provides more examples of how to present content clearly. The practices measured in rows 1 through 6 were rated in the previous version. While the rows are unchanged, language development has moved to the second row. The fifth row now takes a broader look at the evidence of student understanding of explanation. Students' verbal or written responses, dialogue, questions, or level of participation can be indicators of understanding.
The last row recognizes that making connections to students' prior knowledge and experiences is an important piece of explaining content clearly. Prior knowledge is recognized in the 7th row as one way to make connections. Connections to prior knowledge are no longer measured in Teach 1, but the idea that was previously captured in Teach 1 about building on prior knowledge is now reflected here.
To ensure clarity, the name of Teach 3 has been changed to mirror the 2 major indicators measured in this standard: accessibility and challenge. The rest of the Teach standard has remained largely the same. Row 1 measures lesson accessibility. Row 2 measures the challenge the lesson or learning experience provides students.
As in the previous version, the 3rd row measures the balance between teacher-directed instruction and student-initiated and student-centered learning. In addition to being unbalanced due to a lack of student-initiated or student-directed learning, a lesson can also be unbalanced because it involves either too much or too little teacher-directed instruction. Levels 1 and 2 have been revised to reflect this. Lessons with distinct objectives and group meetings are only evaluated on the first 3 rows of this standard. The last 3 rows, which observers will also consider when evaluating center time, continue to measure the accessibility and challenge of the centers and the student's role in the planning process.
The name for Teach 4 has been slightly revised to emphasize the importance of selecting ways to engage students that move them toward mastery. This includes selecting ways that both match the content, measured in row 1, as well as the needs of students, measured in row 2. To prepare students for the rigorous content and higher order cognitive skills required in the Common Core curriculum, the Level 4 indicator in row 1 has been modified. Highly effective teachers ensure that the ways of engaging in the content allow students to develop deep understanding.
Row 1 contains 2 indicators. The top indicator describes practice observed during lessons with distinct objectives, while the bottom indicator measures practice during centers or group meetings. This structural revision increases the clarity of expectations for the various ECE contexts. Row 2 measures how well a teacher matches the way he or she presents the content to students' preferences or needs. During center-based play, this row measures how well the play experience promotes student development, learning, and engagement. Student engagement is an important measure of the appropriateness of the chosen ways, an idea that was previously captured in the notes. As with the previous rubric, the third row measures the quality of experiences with the center materials, while the fourth row measures the depth of student involvement.
During lessons with distinct objectives and group meetings, only 2 rows are considered. In such instances, all evidence must fall under Level 4 to receive a highly effective score in the standard. During centers, because all 4 rows are considered, the majority of evidence must fall under Level 4 to receive a score of highly effective for the standard, as with the other standards.
Row 1 of Teach 5 has remained largely the same, focusing on checking at key moments. The language has been modified to add clarity around the expectations for checks during center time. Row 2, gaining an accurate pulse of student understanding, has been revised to better define the characteristics of an effective check for understanding. To get an accurate pulse during a key moment, effective teachers collect data about the depth of understanding for a range of students. A superficial check may reveal a misunderstanding, but doesn't necessarily tell us why a student answered incorrectly. Checking for depth of understanding allows the teacher to identify the source of the misunderstanding and adjust appropriately.
To get an accurate pulse, the teacher doesn't necessarily need to check in with every student, but rather get a representative sample that gives insight into the general understanding of the class as a whole. This means checking with students at a variety of learning levels. During center time, an accurate pulse may be determined by scanning the room to ensure that all students are engaged in meaningful and productive work or play, as well as checking with students with whom teachers are directly working. Row 3, use a variety of strategies to check for understanding, has remained the same.
You will notice that the name of this Teach standard has changed from responding to student misunderstandings to responding to student understanding. This change was made to reflect the importance of responding to partial understandings as well as to misunderstandings. Row 1 retains the prior language about providing scaffolds in response to minor misunderstandings, and adds that a teacher may need to scaffold in response to partial understandings as well. Sometimes it is not efficient to address a major misunderstanding with scaffolding. To provide more clarity about responding to different levels of misunderstanding, Row 2 focuses on how teachers should reteach when there are more significant or whole class misunderstandings. The first asterisk provides more guidance about when it is appropriate to reteach.
The unique indicator for Level 4 states that a teacher may recognize a student response as a common misunderstanding and share it with the class to lead all students to a more complete understanding. The note with the slanted cross explains that this should only be done in appropriate ways so that student efficacy remains intact. Indicators from the previous rubric have been streamlined to measure adjustments to scaffolds, which are now measured in Row 3. In some cases, misunderstandings may not surface. For this reason, as with the previous rubric, Teach 6 is the only standard that may be scored as non-applicable.
In Teach 7, while teachers are still expected to ask higher-level questions in every learning experience, the use of tasks previously found in the Notes section has been moved into Row 1 to emphasize that tasks can be another effective way of developing students' higher-level thinking. Developing higher-level thinking is a key lever to developing college-ready students and increases students' development across the cognitive domain. All students are capable of reaching higher levels of thinking. The goal is to plan learning experiences that allow all students to reach high levels of thinking across content areas and settings. Because all students do not develop in the same way or at the same speed, it is important that teachers use a variety of questions to develop students' higher level thinking. This practice is measured in Row 2.
Sometimes students initially answer high-level questions with lower-level responses, or are unable to answer at all. The third row describes the support a teacher provides to help these students move towards higher-level thinking. At the beginning of the year, students are not always prepared to give higher-level answers to higher-level questions. In such cases, observers would expect to see significant evidence of the scaffolding mentioned in the third row. As the year progresses, however, it would be expected that teachers have provided enough scaffolding early on so that students are answering at higher levels independently. Student responses are now measured in the fourth row. When many different students answer cognitively demanding questions with meaningful responses, it may indicate that the teacher has intentionally developed an expectation for this type of thinking and interaction. This was previously included as a Level 4 indicator and is now measured across all levels in row 4.
What is measured in Teach 8 remains largely the same, but a few indicators have been streamlined. Row 1 of Teach 8 combines routines, procedures, and transitions, but retains the same language from previous versions of the rubric. Student responsibility in routines and classroom activities continues to be measured. This was previously included as a Level 4 indicator and is now measured across all levels in row 2.
Row 3, which measures teacher interactions during transition, and row 4, which measures the pace of the lesson, are identical to the previous version. Row 5 still measures student idleness because it is important for teachers to plan learning experiences that maximize instructional time. Whereas previously a Level 3 allowed for brief periods during which students were idle, now, in order for a teacher to earn a Level 3, students must always have something meaningful to do. Rows 6 through 8 remain the same.
Teach 9 has changed very little. The language around positive reinforcement has been clarified to provide teachers with greater guidance. The rubric now states that meaningful positive reinforcement can target behavior and developmental milestones or accomplishments. After completing this webinar, you can access a variety of additional resources. These include teach-specific questions to consider while lesson planning, videos highlighting examples from some of the TEACH standards, articles on ECE best practices provided by the Office of Early Childhood, and an FAQ document to answer questions you may have, and a list of rubric references. We hope that you will take advantage of these resources as you continue your professional development.
Thank you for your time and participation in this webinar today. We hope that you found this information useful and wish you and your students success. Should you have additional questions about the revisions to the TLF ECE, please contact Janine Moore at janine.estes